Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give everyone a few minutes to log on and we'll get started shortly. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, using the 9th Annual Employee Relations Benchmark to shape your practices. We're recording today's session and we'll share it with you following the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom panel. Now, I'd like to hand it over to our speaker for today's session, HR Acuity CEO Deb Muller.
Thanks, Lexi, and hello, everybody. I'm turning my video on. Of course, it doesn't want to go on. Let's see. It was just on. I'm going to try again. I keep coming on and off, right? Okay. Well, you may just have to envision what I look like today because I can't get my video to work. But that's okay. We have so much to go through. Oh, there I am. We have so much to go through. I want to get started really quickly. Great to see everybody. I saw someone's in Denver and they said it's a mild day. So I am a little jealous because it is hot, at least on the East Coast. And we're all kind of sweating it out here. But lots to do today. Thank you for joining us for our 9th annual, I can't believe it, Employee Relations Benchmark Study Results webinar that we're going to bring you today. I am joined by two amazing practitioners. I'm so glad to have them here today. I have Sarah Burkhalter. Sarah, if you haven't met her, she recently joined HR Acuity as a lead employee relations solutions consultant. We're so excited to have her here. She brings a great lens and is going to share with us today about using these results as a practitioner because she has been an ER pro for many years at many organizations and is going to bring that insight. So thanks for joining us, Sarah. And once again, we welcome Jeana McNeil. For those of you that have joined us before, Jeana is Vice President at Isurus, and Isurus is our survey partner in doing this with us. And Jeana brings 20 years of experience in conducting strategic market research with clients ranging from the Fortune 500 to startups, and of course to HR Acuity. And really her expertise spans technology, healthcare, education, energy, financial services. Prior to founding Isurus, she was an associate vice president at Research International and a research analyst at Cambridge Reports. And she started her career as a research associate of the Consortium on Financing Higher Education. Jeana holds a BA in psychology from Wellesley College. So thank you so much, Jeana. We couldn't do the survey without you and your team. Oh, and you are on mute.
So nice to be here. Great to see everyone.
That's okay. So great. Lots to get into. I'm going to go through a couple overview slides and then we're going to jump into the data. Okay, so hopefully this is familiar, but HR Acuity, we are the leading provider in employee relations and investigations, case management, all the way from issue through aftercare. We're not going to talk about specifically our product today, but if you're interested in learning how you can further your journey in employee relations with our technology, we'd love to share a curiosity tour, just give you some more information on it. So please reach out to us. In addition to our technology, we do other things like this benchmark study to really further the elevation of the employee relations function, which is really quite a new function. So we're excited about working with you on that. We have other things like our ERQ, our maturity model, our Empower community, which I hope you're all part of. There's more than 6,000 members in our Empower community. It is free. You can collaborate and network with colleagues, get into some great conversations in the Empower community. So please, if you're not a member, you should mark that on your calendar to do today. We will send you all the information in the chat. And then, of course, our ER Roundtable, which is our once a year forum when we get together with strategic ER leaders for large enterprise organizations to really talk about how do we further the function of employee relations, what are the challenges we're facing, best practices to share. It's really an innovative, unique event. And so if you're interested in learning more, let us know. Again, we'll put all the information there. I will say, and I'll probably say it many times, our benchmark study, which we're here to talk about today, it's on our website. Please download it. We are not going to get through everything on it today. And there's so much great information in it. And of course, if you haven't participated in it and your organization has 1,000 or more employees, we'd love to get you involved next year. So let us know, and we start fielding next year's survey in January, and that will cover 2025. Couple important dates that you should keep on your calendar. In addition, today we're having a great Empower discussion on AI and ER. Our Empower hours, which are in Empower, so you have to join. Again, it's free, really easy. You can register right there. Our community-led conversations about what's going on. A lot of conversation about AI and ER. It's going to be really interactive, talking about and having a conversation about how to start, what you're worried about, what you're not worried about, what people are doing, learning. You're going to see some of that information here in the benchmark study about where organizations are, but great conversation on July 22nd that I encourage you to join. Also, we're really excited to announce that starting on September 16th, we are launching our first ever training in Empower. So we are going to be joined by a practitioner, an expert in mediation, the Pollock Institute, and they're going to be doing a 3-part series led by Jeremy Pollock on September 16th in Empower. You can register for that. It's 3 sessions. It is limited to 100 participants. So you're hearing about it first here. We actually haven't started launching right after the holiday. We're going to let everybody else know on LinkedIn, and we're pretty sure it's going to fill fast. So if it's something you're interested in, it's a very interactive session. You're not going to be sitting listening to him for 6 hours. I think it's 3 2-hour sessions over a course of a series of weeks. You'll get SHRM, HRCI credits for it. So it's good. It's really good information. And we know from our community that mediation and conflict resolution and having those skills is something that people are looking for. Employee relations resources need those types of skills more than ever in this environment that we're in. So look out for that. But if you want to get a head start, go to Empower and you'll see how to register right from there. Our roundtable is in Boston. I talked about that before. It's in Boston this year. If you haven't signed up, I think we're almost 70% filled. So if you're interested, it's October 28th and 29th. It's going to be a great event also on our website. And if you're an HR Acuity client, there's an extra day tagged onto that. And there's a new Empower group on benchmarking practices. So it's all about Empower. Join that, join the groups, and continue the conversation. Okay, next slide. Sort of lost my place here. Oh, I love this slide. Actually, it's one of my favorite slides because this is where we give back, right? We thank you for participating in this survey. So in this study, so thank you for participating. And because of that, if you participated, you are able to make a contribution. We make a contribution to selection of your organization. So we have gone ahead and made contributions. I think I'm just looking at my notes here. Due to your generosity of your time, yep, we've donated nearly $7,000 to these nonprofits doing great humanitarian work to support youth and adult mental health, women and gender justice worldwide, the LGBTQ community, and communities facing food crises. So thank you very much. We love making this donation. It's because of the time that you've spent for these organizations doing such great work. All right, so before we dive in, I just want to do a quick overview of the study itself. Now, as I said before, this is the 9th year of our employee relations benchmark study, and we've partnered with Isurus Market Research. And we do that really to ensure the integrity and the rigor of our approach. We've gathered data from enterprise US organizations. Each, you have to have at least 1,000 employees or more, spanning, you'll see, a wide range of industries and structures. And the data that you're going to see here reflects 2024. So the full year of 2024, the calendar year. And we look at it on a confidence interval, and very important. So Jeana, why don't I bring you in here, because this is where we get into statistics. I'd love to hear your point of view on what that confidence interval really means.
Sure. The confidence interval is the measure of the reliability of this data. And this year we had a total of 284 organizations participating in this study. As I'm sure all of you know, if you've received invitations for this, we're always trying to get as broad a participation as we can representing in this study. And so with those 284 organizations, the confidence interval, as it says here, is plus or minus 5.8 percentage points. And what that means is if we were to complete this study 20 times, in 19 out of those 20 times, the results would be, within plus or minus, essentially 6 percentage points of that result. So this is actually a really, respectable, I guess, level of reliability for this data set here in terms of, as I said, if we were to do this another 19 times, we would see data that's pretty much very much in the ballpark of the results that we're going to show you here today.
Yeah, and I love that confidence interval keeps narrowing. So I remember a few years ago, it was 7.6,
Yeah.
it was in the 8s. And again, it's because we continue to do it. It's our 9th annual. We're looking forward to seeing what we can do for our 10-year. Big celebration on that one. So be sure to participate. Just a little bit more on sort of who the participants were in it. Very wide range of industry, company sizes, as I said before. And you can see all this in the study. Strong participation from healthcare, financial services, tech, manufacturing, retail, as well as more distributed and deskless workforces. You'll also see in the blue boxes, more than half of the respondents are from companies with over 10,000 employees. And over 40% operate in a centralized model. Actually, it's not in the blue boxes, but that is additional information that we have here. And again, gives us a broad, credible look at what's happening. There are in the study times we call out differences. I think we've called out a few today. When we look at the data, when we get it back, we look to see, gee, is this trending the same in this size organization or in this industry? And where we see different information, we'll report that out to you.
Yeah. Deb, I was going to make one quick comment to say that in terms of representation, again, which we take very seriously and strive for in this study, that this study is much broader than the HR Acuity customer base. In fact, only 43% of our 284 respondents were HR Acuity customers. So we're very much representing, the breadth of the universe, so to speak, in this sample.
Absolutely. And in the study, we even look at, we're not going to go over today, but we look at our ERQ, which I mentioned, our maturity model, and companies in all different levels of the maturity model take this. We look at the cut of that. You'll see some more information on it. So very wide spectrum. And you're right, less than half of them are HR Acuity clients. All right, let's move on. Okay, so baseline, our norm. So over the years, this benchmark has helped define what has become standard practice in employee relations. And we have called those, I think about 2 or 3 years now, our established ER norms. So what does that mean? If we don't look at them every single year, but when we do, it's really to reaffirm the maturity of the function and to spotlight the practices that are holding steady. So this was one of those, what we found here, certain elements that just are established. They're well established. Resourcing remains consistent per 1,000 employees. You'll see that in the report. Nearly all organizations at this point are operating within a centralized or mixed model. Wasn't always the case, but we're pretty steady on that. There's 7 core case types are now standard. And the scope of ER responsibility also includes 4 key areas. For additional 4 key areas, there's 4 employee relations metrics that are tracked that are pretty standard. And in many ways, this is really a good thing. It means the function has leveled up, but it also gives us a baseline to build from as we shift to more complex challenges ahead. We have those. Now let's start looking at what other information we can learn about our organizations. Now, next thing we want to share, just wait to Lexi. There we go. We're doing a little tag teaming here. But before we dive into the data, I also want to introduce you to a framework that you're going to see referenced throughout the benchmark report. And for those of you that have already downloaded it, you may have already seen this. But this might be the first time you're seeing us refer to what we call 10 essential KPIs for employer relations. These are the metrics that we believe every organization should be tracking to build a stronger, more effective ER function. It's a starting point that we fully expect and we're working on to evolve and add to over time. But for now, we want you to think about these things and start thinking about how you can be tracking these. And for many of them, we even have benchmarks included. So we grouped them into 3 areas. So operational efficiency. How effective is your ER function? What KPIs can drive that? Help you understand that. Trust and experience. How are employees experiencing the process? And then risk and compliance. What's the cost to an employee in an organization if we don't get it right? And you're going to see some of these marked with an asterisk. Those are tracked in this year's benchmark study, and even the bold ones are actually new to the study, and we're going to continue to work on those throughout the year. So we've added context. When you download it, you'll see additional context for each one, what it means, what data you'll need, how to get started, why it matters. So even if these are new concepts to you, you're going to be able to walk through with sort of a clear, practical understanding to put them into action. And we really look forward to seeing more organizations adopt sort of these consistent ways to measuring the health of your ER function. All right, so we're going to start today by just talking about some of the new insights, and then we'll go through some themes that we've seen through it. Again, we're not going to get into everything that that the benchmark study has, and it's impossible for us to do that. We're going to try to highlight a few things and really encourage you to get it, dig deep, read through it. Know that this is not the only time we're going to be talking about this. The benchmark statistics and the data really lives throughout the year in a lot of things that we do. Okay, so some key insights. I feel like there should be a drum roll. Okay, discrimination, harassment, and retaliation issues are at an all-time high. So we are now at 14.7 issues per 1,000 employees. That's the highest we've ever recorded. So to us, it's really not just a number. I think it's more of a signal. It's a signal that employee experience is under pressure, and ER teams are on the front lines. The stakes are rising, and of course, so is the risk. Actually more than a third of organizations still have lax investigation processes. This one shows up year after year, but 42% of organizations still do not have consistent investigation frameworks, and it's a liability. It's a legal, financial, and reputational risk. It's waiting to happen. So standardizing your process isn't nice to have anymore, and we need to be moving that number lower, right? We want that to go lower. Substantiation rates. The data is still spotty, and that's going to hurt your trust. So what we found here is only half of the organizations actually track substantiation rates at all. And just 30% are looking at substantiation issues by issue type. And so the problem with this is without it, and we're going to talk more about as we get into this, is you can't benchmark outcomes, you can't spot bias, evaluate the effectiveness of your policies. And this is really the data that's going to help build trust in organizations. We're going to talk about AI a little bit more. AI right now, people are talking about it, but it's just barely getting into the actual operational picture. There's a lot of buzz, but 44% of organizations still have no AI adoption in ER today. The interest is there, but many don't know where to start. And so we're going to talk about what that means, what responsible AI means in employee relations, how to use it to identify real pain points like case summaries, scheduling, or insights, and how to start. Where should your organization start to get more comfortable with it? And what should you be staying clear of? And finally, the other data is that most teams still can't assess case complexity. That's a new benchmark that we have this year. 68% lack the data to understand how complex their cases really are. And what this means is it's going to affect your resources and how they're aligned to the work. One case is not equal to another. And so when you start to look at things like case complexity, in this case, we're looking at issue to case ratio. There's some other things that can build into case complexity. You don't know what you're working on. You really don't know if you need more resources and you probably need some better tools. So some key insights that we're going to get into a little more in detail. I probably went into them more details. All right, so let's go into some highlights of the state of employee relations. All right, so I mentioned this before, staffing ratios, pretty much the same. It's one of the norms, but let's talk about this. So despite the rise in performance-related issues across the board or issues that we're having, resources levels, similar to previous years, haven't budged. It doesn't seem like people are going to get more resources. They're still kind of back to where they were in 2022. The median staffing ratio is around 0.65 ER FTEs per 1,000 employees. That's how we normalize it for all companies. There are some economies of scale here. You can see that here with smaller companies needing more resources. The larger you get, that goes down. So not a big surprise there. But what's especially important that 79% of ER teams are now handling performance issue too. And that scope is widening, but the headcount isn't. And there's a gap. And for many teams, it's becoming unsustainable. And so this is where, I'd love to hand it off to someone like Sarah to say, like, what does this do to your organization day to day when you're really trying to plan and, have smart defensible practices?
Absolutely.
Well, I think a lot of ER leaders are experiencing having to do more with less. And so having a resource like this and even going back to who answered the call and that representation piece, why it's so important, is to help you build a business case that has the validity and the confidence to make those staffing requests. I think about my own experience having been an HR Acuity customer at two different organizations. This was a great resource to start in terms of requesting that staff and utilizing it to my advantage to show not just what other organizations were doing, but the reason in which why I was requesting what I was requesting at the time, which had to do with case complexity and the fact that my team did handle performance issues. And that's not necessarily the same across the board. So I think really being able to utilize the benchmark to address those questions that you're going to get when it comes to who else is using this, where are these numbers coming from? That's what ultimately really strengthens that vision, that strategy that you can present for your own ER function.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're not the only one we've heard that said these data has really helped them get those resources that they desperately need. And I love how you talking about that case complexity, because we're going to talk more about that later as well. Awesome. Next slide. All right. So the other thing we ask is about what's the driver of the issues that are coming through or that came through in 2024, and mental health challenges still top driver. It's at the top there. It's decreasing. It's slowing a little bit. It's 64% of organizations cited this year. Last year was, or in 2022, it was at its highest, which you can probably understand why. Coming out of COVID, it was 79%, but it's still a big part of the picture. It's just no longer the full story. There's other things that are also causing issues to rise. Some of the major drivers saw a dip. You can see those there, the arrows going down that we had seen across the board, maybe a cooling off across the board. But there's two important shifts that I think we want to call out. First, the political environment is surging as a driver. I guess not a big surprise. 2024, if you remember, was a notable election year, but that was up 19 points, and I know you felt it. And I don't think that's going to stop. I think ER teams are continuing to be ready for more politically charged conflicts than we ever saw before, for conversations, certainly inside the workplace. The second thing we're seeing is generational dynamics. That has entered the list for the first time. So new thing here. So we can't really compare it, but it debuted pretty strong. 30% of organizations cited that generational differences or multi-generational friction as a key factor. So that's something to watch as expectations continue to grow in the workplace. Sarah, anything you want to say about this? Is surprising to you? You're just coming out of a operational role yourself.
Definitely not surprising, having, I think, experienced a lot of the issues that are highlighted here. I think this for me though was huge in terms of for the year, where did I need to focus our strategy? What were the areas that we needed to pay attention to? I used it as an opportunity to reach out to my peers on Empower or people that I had met at the round table. I think we all know that ER work is evolving. It's no longer just about what when it comes to case volume, it's about why. You have to identify the drivers. You have to understand how that attribution helps to lead you and your organization more strategically based on what it is you're trying to accomplish. I think when you see the mental health, although it's declining, there's definitely, you can't let your attention drift from
Oh
that
no.
because that's going to still be, I think, a factor. And then, of course, when you look at the things that we experienced as a society, especially in the US, I think this really just mimics what people were going through and how that lends itself to the workplace and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and the mental health, I think maybe we're getting used to the fact that it is a driver now, right? It wasn't the greatest driver this year because it's high, and we're recognizing that already. I also just remind everybody, why is the conflict resolution, the mediation training that we're having on our plate? Because we've heard this, because the dynamics in the workplace are different than they were maybe when you started in ER or the many years, or you're new to ER. And we know that the skills of employee relations professionals that they need now are different. So I'm just going to give another plug for that. We're really excited to sponsor it because we know this is what's happening in the workplace. All right, next slide. Okay, we talked a little bit about case complexity and volume here. So, but we're going to talk about volume of the cases. This is always, I know it's always the page in my report that's dog-eared because people are always asking about this. So let's dig into this. Now, at first glance, if you look across here, you might think that the risk is decreasing. The total ER case volume, I want to kind of look at this data first, has dropped. So it's down to 124.6 per 1,000 employees. And that is the lowest we've seen since 2021. But let's look at the right side of the slide. While the total volume is down, discrimination, harassment, and retaliation claims, as I mentioned before, has hit an all-time high. That is more than double than what we saw 2 years ago. And this aligns with what we predicted following the EEOC guideline updates, which we're now sort of seeing play out, which is funny because those guidelines actually aren't their guidelines anymore, but it's still causing differences in how we look at this or how people are reporting things. And it's going to be really interesting to watch this in 2025, given the recent Ames Supreme Court decision and whether or not we're going to continue to see a spike as sort of the playing field of folks that might make these types of claims has effectively broadened. Now, what's going on here? It's not, I don't think that there's fewer problems, just cases are more complex. So one case might include multiple intertwined issues, a performance concern, could be a behavioral issue, a policy violation could escalate to a retaliation. And I think that's something that really we need to play a close eye on. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
I see, when the complexity is growing, to me, that would indicate our profession as a whole is really stepping up in our maturity from an employee relations standpoint. That's how I kind of see that just holistically. But then I think about this is the kind of data that I would use to help with internal training efforts when it came to my own team. Okay, if we know that harassment, retaliation, discrimination, these are the allegations that are increasing, maybe we need to take an enhanced focus of our own internal training just to make sure that we're being consistent in our approach. That's also going to lead you to really start to think about, are we training our employees in a way that's keeping up with what this data is suggesting so that they understand discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, and they do feel more comfortable to bring things forward. The other thing is, I think it's an amazing opportunity to really have that collaboration and partnership, especially if you look at discrimination or depending on the harassment allegations, an opportunity for those of you that have a DE&I team to identify those areas. What are more targeted resources that you can help bring to help employees with understanding and clarity on those topics in an environment where they feel safe to do so?
Yeah, it's all such great information. How do you take this data and make it work for your organization? And I even think about this, we're going to talk later about substantiation rate. And I talked earlier about how not most organizations, more than half of them, I think the stat was, aren't looking at that. And so you need to have that together to really understand, is there an inherent issue? Do we have policy issues, a training? All this data has to come together and sort of I wouldn't say a plea, but sort of the emphasis this year is, if we really want to continue elevating the function, we need to start elevating our maturity and how we look at our data and what we use it for. All right, so let's move on. So this is one of the most requested KPIs from the benchmark study. We get this all the time, time to close. And this year we looked at it, we refined how we captured it. Jeana, do you want to maybe share a little bit about how we changed this?
Sure, absolutely. We're excited about the new and improved data here on time to close metrics. As some of you who've followed the benchmark in previous years may recall, the measurement of time to close was like in weeks, sort of ranges of weeks. And so it wasn't really very precise. It was more directional. This year, we asked respondents to the study to provide actually the number of days that each of these types of cases were open for, and then we use that to provide an average as well as kind of a typical range in which each of these types of cases are closed. And again, with the goal of providing just more granular and hopefully more useful data on time to close, because as you said, Deb, it is such a valued metric.
Which is I sort of have two sides to it, because I as a ER professional myself, I never want to hold someone to a time, right? Oh my gosh, 3 weeks. Haven't you finished that? Let's go. Of course, that's not what you want to do. And I know that anybody here has never done that. However, this information is still helpful, right? It is Directional, it helps you look at your averages. If you have one investigator that's maybe taking a lot more time, maybe there's a training need, or maybe something's happening in your organization, or there's a complexity issue. So I think any data is helpful. It's how you use it. I don't think anybody's suggesting we say, oh, you got to finish your policy violations in 19 days or else you're out of touch. But it helps you understand what may be happening in your organization. Why are things taking longer than they should? Where's the hang up? How long things take, help breed or breed distrust. So how can we, help move things quicker in an appropriate way? So again, directional, and I'm so glad we made that change.
Absolutely.
All right. All right, technology adoption. It's pretty consistent with past years. 58% of organizations are using a dedicated platform built for employee relations. Great to see, especially as case complexity grows. And of course, we've continued to see a decline in the use of spreadsheets, generic databases. It's down to just 13%. So I love this. If we're going to mature, we need more tools. We need tools that are meant for this type of work. It's different, it's nuanced. Teams are recognizing Excel just isn't going to work it. Just not going to cut it. And again, we only take data from companies with 1,000 employees or more. If you have less than 100 employees, maybe a spreadsheet is okay. It's good enough. But certainly, we have companies smaller than that using Acuity. There's a lot of things that you just cannot get from that. The one thing I would say that surprises us is ticketing systems, right? It's still used by 16% of organizations, and that actually includes some Fortune 100 and Global 500 companies. We think it's partly due to sort of IT-led standardization or limited HR controls over those tech decisions, but we are seeing more companies frustrated by that because it's just different. The data is stored differently. The permissions are different. Your ability to configure it for the nuances is different. So we're going to see what happens. But Sarah, what are your thoughts, having used probably both?
Yes, no, well, it's just another great resource when you're trying to build your business case. I think especially if you're positioning your ER department to be a strategic partner, when it comes to culture and risk management, it's really hard to do that if you don't have a system that's capable of that complexity. And you've said it before, people are complex. And I know for me, I sat through multiple demos at two organizations trying to figure out which system was going to work for us. And ticketing systems just didn't have the complexity that we were looking for because of that strategic direction we were really trying to move towards. And so I think when you're trying to highlight that value, those are the things that you really have to look at. But same as you, I'm so glad to see spreadsheets or generic database going down because one wrong step and the whole thing is off. Versus you have the ability to look at with a complex system what that audit path looks like and really have the confidence and the validity of the data supporting whatever it is you're asking for.
Yeah. And even the HRIS, very small, but sometimes people say, well, we use Workday, which Workday uses us and we're partners with them. So we know that doesn't work. But I like to explain to people when you think about an HRIS, it's a one-to-one. You're thinking about the employee record. One employee. Think about your last ER issue that included one employee. Didn't impact anybody else. You can't find it. Somebody's performance is down. It impacts more people. There's a manager involved. And many of them have multiple people on them. So what do you do with that data? How do you report that data? It's just not purpose built for it. Everything has its purpose. So, all right. So let's go to the next page. So this is exciting. Like, what are people using this data for? I think there we go. Okay. I love this because what we're seeing is teams are using data to not just document the past, but really to shape the future. And one of the things when I built HRQD, it's not just about tracking. It's how do we use that data to shape what will happen. And that's really the beauty of it. So this year we found 57% of organizations told us they've identified patterns, behaviors, or incidents or early events that are predictive of future ER issues. So that makes me so happy. It's really huge, and we've grown so much, and it's because of this incredible community really, making the point that this matters and being able to show that to our organizations and make a difference. People aren't just observing, they're acting. We saw a 16% jump in teams using data to launch initiatives aimed at preventing trends or spikes. and a 10-point increase to those that are using it to spot early warning flags and intervene sooner. So really, I think this signals a real shift in how ER is operating. Sarah, any thoughts on this one? Because I'm sure you have some.
Well, I love that we're now able to utilize data in a way that speaks to the business and identifying warning flags, being able to take that more proactive, strategic approach, which I think is what we're all trying to work towards. Because when you have an organization that's really focused on building trust with employees, that's really trying to work through, I think, creating these psychologically safe environments, these are the things that you're typically seeing happen in those organizations. And if you're not there yet, I think this gives you a map of maybe how to utilize that data to start to look into doing that. And also, just again, another great resource to showcase, hey, if we had more staff, we might be able to utilize this in a different way that will help us measure the impact, identify the warning signs, implement the initiatives that we're working towards.
And by little plug for those KPIs, right? Great place to start. You have the data to start showing, here's a metric, here's how we're doing, here's how we did quarter over quarter, or slicing and dicing your organization to start having that information. Or for those of you, if you're in the bucket of the 9% that are gathering but not using, and the 1% that are not sure, come to the roundtable, come to the Empower Hours, learn how your colleagues are using it so you can take that step. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be perfect at the beginning, but you can just start small and you have the data there.
And I would add to this discussion too, that one of the things we do in the benchmark survey is ask people for examples that they want to share of specific things that they've been doing with their data. And so I think it's on page 37 of the full benchmark report. There are some, examples that real world examples that people have shared, which again, to Sarah's point, are kind of a good way to get ideas and inspiration about how to take your data further.
Jeana, I love that you brought that up. That's my favorite part of the study. We don't go into them here, but just hearing the words and seeing the examples and, get part of the community. There's a great live feed and Empower, ask people, for a starter. We're actually working on something in Acuity, which we think is going to help you build that sort of standardization of the way all organizations are looking at ER data. So more on that. We're excited about that coming out soon. All right. So now we're going to move on. Those are sort of the insights. Let's go to some key themes, starting with the KPI. So I think that's sort of the nice thing. But here's 3 key themes. I can't talk today that we want to go through. It's too hot. It's the heat, I think. We're going to talk a little bit about the KPIs. We're going to talk about this a little bit more about the surge that we saw in the allegations of harassment, discrimination, and sort of how that demand structures, investigations, how we can protect, what that looks like against investigations and structured processes. And then, of course, we couldn't go through a presentation these days without talking about AI. So we're going to talk about what we're learning, what we learned through the study, and what's coming next in AI. All right. All right, so let's talk about KPIs and why it's hurting us by not tracking them. So let's talk about this one. And this has to do with hotline issues. This is one of the KPIs. Hotline issues per 1,000 employees is one KPI, and the name versus anonymous reports. And again, we can give you all that detail in the benchmark study, what those mean and how you can track those. Now, it's encouraging that you'll see in the benchmark that 93% of organizations offer an anonymous way to report concerns. So we got that. That aligns with what we've seen year over year. The infrastructure is there. But here's where it breaks down. Only 44% of organizations actually track how many reports come in anonymously versus by name. And that is a big gap, because when you're not measuring that, you can't really assess how comfortable people are coming forward. And you may be missing patterns of who's reporting and who isn't. Now, so certainly something we want to see that raise up. Now, the organizations that do track it, of those 44%, we saw something that was encouraging. 76% of the issues are reported by name. So not only they track it, and 76% are reported by name. And that is a sign of trust. But again, if you're not tracking it, you don't know if that's true for your team. A few years ago, we did our misconduct report, and it showed that if you have a way to track, it's a signal to your employees that you're more willing to hear them when they come forward. And so I think this is sort of re-emphasizing that stat. And it really matters. This reporting data really gives you an insight into psychological safety, the leadership culture, which channels are working or not working. And it can help you improve outreach, train your manager, close gaps, and really engage with the way the reporting systems are working. Go to the next. All right, so just some thoughts on this to align on what to measure in issue reporting for real impact, right? How do we make this issue reporting truly impactful? It's not just enough to offer a hotline. It's not even enough to track usage. You need to understand what's happening underneath those numbers. So here, are all employees aware of the hotline? Do they know how to use it? If they don't know what's there, they won't use it. If they're not comfortable sharing their name, that tells you something too. They still can report anonymously, but you want to look at that trend. Imagine if one part of your organization, you can report, everybody reports anonymously, but the rest of the organization, people feel very good coming forward. What does that tell you? Is there an issue in that area of the organization that you might want to dig into? Are your tools accessible and inclusive? Are they mobile friendly? Are they available in multiple languages? Do hourly workers use them as much as corporate staff? Are they using employee terms, not legal terms, not HR terms? Are they in the language that make employees feel comfortable? What types of issues are being reported and what's missing? Are there teams, like I was saying before, are there teams or geographies with a high anonymous reporting or total silence? Again, both are signals that deserve a closer look, but you have to get that signal in order to look closer, in order to know where to look. And what's being done to address fears of retaliation? If employees don't believe they'll be protected, they're going to stay silent. And so that really matters. It's going to help you spot problems early, show your employees their voices matter, remove friction points, fix broken processes, and strengthen your culture. So just some questions to think about. And these are all in the survey as well. And we'll send these out to you to think about what's happening in your organization. All right. The next KPI, I love this, is a new benchmark, issue to case ratio, that we've started to look at. We've even looking at it more in our platform as well, to be able to handle this. But this is I think one of the most important and underutilized KPIs in employee relations, the issue to case ratio. It measures how many distinct issues are tied to a single ER case. Things like performance concerns that evolve into behavioral issues, or retaliation complaints linked to a prior accommodation request, for example. So this is the first year we asked organizations if they track this. And here's what we found. The average case involves 1.4 issues. Okay, so you see that there. That's a clear signal that case complexity is rising, or at least we have a starting point. We have a benchmark to see that, and see what we already know, that cases are not like a one issue to one issue area. The challenge that we found is that 68% of organizations don't track this at all. So while we're showing 1.4 issues per case and 30% of the cases involving multiple issues, you can see that there, this is likely, in our belief, understating what's really happening on the ground. And I know, Jeana, you have some thoughts on this, Jeana.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that 68% of organizations saying no is really a startling magnitude, I think, of the statistic here, with that gap in their data. There were a couple of, well, I guess I would say one thing overall about case complexity, to your point, Deb, with this metric. This is the first year we're measuring it. Sometimes in the benchmark, when measurements are new, we'll see how it moves or not over the coming years. So this is one definitely to keep an eye on, just in terms of it being a new thing that we're tracking. I also wanted to point out that we saw a couple of interesting things in terms of where the issue tracking for organizations that do or don't do it, that we saw that tracking issues per case is more prevalent in organizations that are using a centralized ER model. And it's also more prevalent in organizations that are using a purpose-built ER platform. So again, going back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago, Deb, this is another example, perhaps, where having that purpose-built platform gives you the tools and the visibility into important issues like case complexity.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you on that. Again, it's one of those things that if you're just a ticketing system, you're not thinking that a ticket is an issue, and you're not able to really look at that strategically. So my sort of call out to everybody and ask is, let's start tracking it. whatever you're using, find a way, whether it's through a tickler sheet or a Excel spreadsheet or some sort of a tag in whatever system you're using. Certainly, if you use HR Acuity, you can do that. But again, many of our respondents don't. This is such valuable information for us to be able to report. It's valuable information for our community to have. So the more people that track it, the more we can put into this benchmark. And it's really important. If you're only tracking case counts, you're missing the real workload. Complexity is what drives time, burnout, risk. And this is the ratio that's going to help you measure it. It's also going to help you identify hotspots, recurring issues, ultimately justify resources that you need as well. So really important. And so if you're not tracking this, really encourage you to really think about how you can start doing that. And it's not too late. Start in the middle of the year. It's fine. July 1. It's all good. All right. And so I'm probably going to repeat what I said here, but what does case complexity mean for your team, your organization? How do you think about this? Again, you can use it to think about how many of your cases have more than one issue. You'll be able to compare it to a benchmark. Now that we have the benchmark, it's going to be there. So are we more complex than others? Are there certain case types driving complexity? Performance, is it always paired with harassment or retaliation? We know that retaliation is sort of like an add-on complaint. Is that happening more or less? Can we do more to educate our managers on that, our employees on that? Can we look at if we have a problem with retaliation? So it's really important that you're able to look at that. Are your case assignments fair? Are the more complex cases going to the more experienced investigators, right? Not every case is equal. And how does the complexity, of course, compare to the industry benchmark? So we're starting to have that. If you start looking at yours, you're now going to have the HR Acuity benchmark study to align to see if you're operating in line with your peers or way beyond them. So, this is going to give you questions to ask. And if you have data, you can start answering those and figure out what direction to take in your organization. All right. So that moves us to substantiation, another critical. I'm not sure which one I think is more important. So I'm going to tell you they both are important, but let's talk about case disposition, specifically substantiation rate. Because I think this is one of the most important ways to measure the integrity and the effectiveness of your ER processes. Right now, just over half of organizations track overall substantiation rate, and only 30% track by issue type, which actually is just as important. And even fewer have access to that data. So while we know that on average, and you'll see this here, 43% of issues were substantiated last year, most organizations still don't have the clarity they need to understand what's really happening and whether policies are being fairly applied, if there's bias in the workplace, if there's training that they need, if there's potential issues in one part of the organization or not, if their practices and processes need to be updated. So it's a real missed opportunity to build trust, to improve consistency, and show that you're closing the loop. I'm going to share an example that one of our Empower members and one of our clients shared at a webinar a few months ago, which still sticks in my head. They look at case substantiation and they found that data loss was the case type, the issue type that was substantiated the most in their organization. So this was not just HR data, it became business insights. And they brought it up to leadership. They said, we have an issue. The biggest issue we're having in this organization is data loss. Data loss. That is not an HR issue. I mean, it is a people issue, right? Let me tell you, within just a few weeks, they had recs in place for 6 to 7 more security engineers. They were updating their onboarding, their offboarding practices. They were reviewing their infrastructure and how it was dealing with data loss, because that was going to affect the business. This is what this data provided. And if you start being able to tell those stories and provide that data, they're going to be asking you for more information. And ER is going to have a different type of conversation with the organization. This is really a very critical thing to be tracking in your organizations. And we're going to keep doing it, and we're going to see what happens with the data. And hopefully next year, more than 51% of organizations are going to track it, and more than 30% will even do it by issue type. All right, let's dig deeper into it, a little bit deeper here. Let's see if I can get here. All right, let's zoom in here and see if we can see clear patterns. We talked about this before, but we did ask some, again, it's a small portion because not everybody tracks this, but policy violations and sexual harassment claims have higher substantiation rates. We're finding that around 50%. But discrimination and retaliation cases, they sit much lower. Only 15 to 16% are substantiated. There could be valid reasons for this, but it's also a signal worth digging into. Particularly on the retaliation. If employees repeatedly raise concerns into certain categories and they see no action taken, it can undermine trust and deter future reporting. It doesn't mean you should substantiate something that's not there, but what is that telling us? Is there training that's needed? Are there issues that are substantiated other than discrimination that can be dealt with in the workplace? And you see that as well here, substantiated with other findings, which is not untypical to find as well. But really, again, tracking by issue, it exposes bias, flags training gaps, shows whether your investigations are both fair and thorough, and it really builds transparency and helps reduce long-term risk. So any thoughts on this, Jeana? Could just we go back a second, just because we had some changes from last year. I don't know if it's worth calling out.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a little bit of an uptick in, substantiation for sexual harassment policy violations. So I would say these are, kind of borderline statistically significant, not necessarily major shifts in the data. I would point out that if you look kind of at the average or sort of the middle point of this slide that, sort of goes from like 26% substantiated to 44%, that on the previous slide, you said overall 43%, overall are substantiated. And then when we drill down into by issue type, we kind of see this, half of these are above, half are below. So, might be a coincidence there, but just kind of an interesting pattern here.
Absolutely. All right, Lexi's giving me the cue that we got 10 minutes left. So I'm going to go this side. I'm not going to dig into this, but again, some questions here to think about how you can uncover risk with this data, just things that you can ask as you go through the data with your teams. All right, let's go into surging. We got a lot to do here. We talked a little bit about this, but let's go into this more detailed. Again, this is the dog-eared page. You're going to see here everything that comes here. I'd say the most important thing here is that even though, as I said before, total ER case volume dropped, allegations of harassment, discrimination hit an all-time high. And so we're going to have to see where this goes. As we go through the data, I don't think there's more to talk about here, but we're going to watch and see what happens. All right. The other challenge with data, so please, let's start tracking this. As we evolve as a function, we need to start sort of getting more proactive in what we're tracking to really see these trends, is there's limited insight into issue value, and that really is going to hinder us from a proactive perspective. This year, for the first time, we actually asked about distinct issue categories. I think we had them in like 5 in previous years, and many organizations are not capturing this. So hopefully now people are going to start capturing at this level. These are pretty standard distinct issue categories that you should be tracking. And so if you don't have this, it could mean that a lot of teams are assigning cases on incomplete information, and it's going to limit your visibility. It's going to slow progress. So here's some data. You have it here. Now that you have it, you can track your cases and benchmark against it. And that's the value of benchmarking. All right, next slide. Again, some more questions on it. Look at where you are, where are issues spiking, where are you up or above the benchmarks? Are there certain departments? I love slicing and dicing this information. That's going to really drive more targeted input from your team. If you can look at it by region or by function to see where are your numbers outpacing or under the industry benchmarks. Really important. Okay, let's talk about practices. This is sort of one I always love to talk about, but 2 in 5 organizations are still using lax investigation process, which is kind of hard to believe. It's encouraging. We've held steady. 57% of organizations are now reporting using a required structured process to conduct investigation. And that is real progress because we had that dip a few years ago, but still this 2 in 5 organization, it leaves significant room for inconsistency, risk, and employee mistrust. Now, what's interesting, and you'll see this in the report, is that required processes are more common. Maybe it's interesting, maybe not a big surprise among the Fortune 100 and Fortune and Global 500 companies, likely because they understand how damaging an investigation misstep can be to their brand and culture. We also see higher adoption among organizations with a strong ERQ score, which just sort of makes sense, right? Suggesting that they recognize how much structure influences outcomes. So the takeaway is pretty clear. Required processes are foundational safeguards. They build trust, they reduce risk, and they support consistency, which is so important, especially in today's, I would say, higher stakes landscape than we've had in the past. I love to talk about this because we sliced and diced the data a little bit because we really want to see what happens when you actually use a structured process. And we looked at it against average days to close. And maybe it's not a surprise, but required processes generally take more time. And that's not surprising because they're more thorough and they're designed to protect the integrity of the process. When investigators are left to discretion, corners can really get cut. And so the timelines may shrink, but so does the confidence the investigation was done right. And if you look at that, there's one notable exception here, EEOC or agency-related cases, right? Here we see slightly faster close times when a required process is in place, and likely because these protocols are built to meet external deadlines and expectations. And I think this reinforces a key point. Thorough doesn't have to mean inefficient. It just means purposeful. I also think when we talk about AI in about 2 seconds, because I got to get there, this is where we can really help, not take away the integrity of the investigation process, but maybe speed up some of the more administrative parts of the investigation. All right, confidence in ER tech, I want to grows with required processes and a centralized model in ER tech. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we do ask about how confident our workplace investigators feel with the process, right? I feel confident that our workplace investigators consistently follow the process, high degree of confidence, 88%. But it changes depending upon whether you have a required process, a suggested process, a centralized or mixed model, and the use of ER tech or no ER tech, right? So you see it's significantly higher with those things in place. So some good data to look at as you go through the study. And again, some questions to ask you, but I want to move on to the AI stuff in the 4 minutes we have left. Okay, AI adoption, because we know it's important to all of you. Let's go to the next slide. Let's see. All right, here's what we asked. Where are you in your AI adoption? And we're seeing that AI adoption in employee relations is really still in its infancy. Nearly half of the organizations report no use of it at all, and just over a third are experimenting or piloting. And what's interesting and encouraging is that organizations with required investigation processes are already showing more maturity in AI adoption. You'll see that in the report. And they're twice as likely to be deploying AI in a meaningful way. So we've said this before, AI is not a replacement for judgment or empathy, but it can elevate how we work if implemented thoughtfully. As cases grow in complexity, AI can help us in driving efficiency, consistency, and insights while still preserving that human connection that makes our work really so meaningful. Next slide. Low adoption implies that organizations face challenges getting started. So we kind of showed you, what did you say your interest was in last year, right? We asked where the interests were, but this year the gap between interest and action is pretty clear. 63% aren't using AI in investigations or ER at all. Some people are getting used to it. Some people are sort of, trying it out for writing assistance, some policy recommendations that are going forward. So we need structure, we need guardrails, we need alignment with organizational values, and really a plan to ensure that AI enhances and not replaces human judgment. Some great questions here. Not going to go through them all today. I wish we had more time, but we are having that conversation. This is what we're going to talk about. It's a great kind of segue into the Empower conversation that's happening next month about AI and ER. So we really encourage you to join that, and we can dig into these a little bit further. All right, so I'm sorry I had to run through this. We knew that was going to happen. We never know sort of where this will take us. It brings us to the end of our deep dive into this year's findings and the 4 themes that we believe matter now in employee relations. I think the data tells a clear story. We have about 2 minutes. I feel badly, Lexi, we probably don't have time for questions. We could take them at another time, perhaps do a session.
Definitely. And we have that new benchmarking group in Empower as well. So feel free to pose your questions in there and we can answer them and members of the community can. And I think Linda was in the chat answering any questions that she could. So, yeah, with 1 minute left, if there's any last questions.
And by the way, a big thank you to Linda. This is her baby. She runs a survey. She does a great job. It is a lot of work with Jeana and team. Sorry, I don't want to not
Oh,
mention
Linda.
that as well, but I mean, she gets through this and, and gets it out the door for us. We couldn't do it without her. And the conversation does continue every year. It continues throughout the year. So please join the group, download the study, dig into it, ask questions, and we're going to be there to have more conversations about what does this data mean and where are we going next. So it's exciting. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sarah. Great commentary. Loved it. Jeana, thank you as always for being our partner in this. And thanks everybody else, and have a wonderful upcoming 4th of July holiday. And we will see you soon. Stay cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.